The alien woman walked into my room. Now she won't leave. It started on a night like any other, the kind of night that should have been ordinary, calm, and unremarkable. He had just finished his work, an evening filled with the usual stack of emails and half-drunk cups of tea, the kind that cooled down long before he had time to notice. His apartment was small but tidy, the kind of place that could make someone feel safe if they were used to solitude. He was used to it. He liked it. Or at least, he thought he did. The first strange sign was almost nothing. A faint sound, barely audible, like the soft scrape of a chair on the floor. At first he thought it was the old building settling, the pipes shifting in the walls, or maybe a neighbor returning home late. But then the shadow crossed the room, something that didn't belong. It wasn't the kind of shadow made by the moonlight spilling through the blinds. No, this shadow had form, movement, presence. He froze. His mind tried to reason it away, telling himself that sleep deprivation was making him imagine things. He had been working long hours, sometimes forgetting to eat or drink enough water. Maybe he was imagining. Maybe it was a trick of the light. But then the air shifted, and he could feel it, not in a way he could explain, but in a way that made every hair on his arms stand up. She was there. Not in the doorway, not in a corner, but just there, standing in the middle of the room. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, didn't blink.
She simply stood, observing him. He noticed the first detail that made his heart tighten. Her eyes.
They were too calm, too clear, as if she could see right through him. There was no judgment, no anger, no curiosity, just observation. And that observation was heavier than anything he had ever felt. "Who are you?" he finally whispered, his voice barely carrying across the room. The words sounded strange in the air, as if they were coming from someone else entirely. His throat was dry, and his hands shook just enough to make him aware that his body had stopped obeying him. She tilted her head slightly, a movement so small it could have been mistaken for a blink, but it wasn't.
"I am someone who needed to see you," she said, her voice soft but precise. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't warm either.
It was like listening to a memory that didn't belong to you, a voice that shouldn't exist in that place, at that time.
He wanted to laugh, to shake his head and say he must be dreaming. But something in the tone of her words made it impossible.
She knew things about him, he realized. Small things. Things only he would know. The way he kept a single mug on his nightstand, the old notebook on the corner of his desk, filled with scribbles no one else could read. How could she know these things? And yet, she did. He took a step back, almost bumping into his desk, trying to create some kind of space between them. "This isn't real," he said to himself. Louder this time, as if saying it out loud could make it true. "I'm imagining this." But she didn't move, didn't respond, didn't even blink. She just continued to watch, and the silence stretched in the room until it became almost unbearable. The clock ticked, though time felt suspended. Every tick was louder than it should have been, every second dragging him into a strange state of awareness where nothing made sense, yet everything felt hyper-real. He tried to think logically. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe he had eaten something bad. Maybe his mind was breaking down from stress. But as he looked at her, standing there with her calm, unwavering presence, he realized that no matter what it wasn't something he could ignore. And that terrified him more than anything else. I think you need to leave," he said, his voice firmer, shaking slightly, but with an effort to regain some sense of authority. "This is my home. I don't know who you are, and I don't want you here." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a step closer, slow and deliberate, yet she didn't cross the line. She respected the invisible boundary he had created, though she made it clear that she had no intention of leaving.
I'm not here to harm you, she said.
I only need to be here for a little while. And that was the moment he realized he was trapped in a situation that had no clear rules. She was neither threatening nor friendly. She simply was. And being faced with someone, or something, that simply exists in your space, with no explanation, no reason, and no threat, can be far more unsettling than fear itself. Hours seemed to pass in moments. He tried turning on the lights, tried to make loud noises, tried to convince himself it was all a dream. He even went so far as to leave the room, thinking maybe she would vanish when he wasn't looking. But when he returned, she was still there, standing, watching, calm, patient, unyielding. He began to notice more details. Her movements were too precise, too calculated, yet they were human in shape. Her skin had a strange texture, almost translucent in the soft glow of the lamp. And her eyes, they followed him wherever he went. Not in a predatory way, but as if she were mapping him, learning him. He felt exposed in ways he couldn't describe, as if nothing about him could be hidden, not even thoughts he didn't know he had. By midnight, he was exhausted. His mind raced, trying to find some kind of explanation. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was it. People had these experiences when they were stressed or sleep-deprived. But then, when he leaned back against his chair, he noticed the faintest trace of movement in her hands, subtle gestures he hadn't seen before. That was impossible in sleep paralysis. Hallucinations didn't move that deliberately, that consistently. He realized that whatever she was, she had chosen him. Chosen this small room, this life, this very moment. And that choice, that quiet insistence, was more terrifying than any threat he could imagine. He tried talking to her again, this time softer, more pleading.
Why are you here?
What do you want from me? Her answer was simple, but it carried a weight he couldn't bear to fully understand. I need to see you. I need to understand. And in that statement, he understood the truth he had been avoiding. This was no random intrusion.
She wasn't here by accident.
She had a purpose. What that purpose was, he didn't know. And worse, he didn't know if he could refuse it. The rest of the night passed in a blur of tension and silence. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Job, every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing there, waiting, watching, patient, yet inscrutable. By the time dawn approached, he felt hollow, exhausted, and irrevocably changed. He didn't know if he would ever see the room the same way again, or if he would ever feel entirely safe in the world that had once been ordinary. And then, as the first light of morning crept through the blinds, she finally spoke, almost as if reading his thoughts. I will not leave, she said simply. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a promise. It was a fact. A statement of reality that made him realize that his life, as he had known it, had changed forever. He didn't argue. He didn't even try. There was something in the way she said it, calm, unshakable, that made resistance feel pointless. The night had already passed. The world had shifted in ways he could not undo. And he understood, deep in his bones, that the presence in his room was not going anywhere, at least not anytime soon. And for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a mix of fear, awe, and curiosity. The morning light did little to calm him. In fact, it only made the presence in his room feel more real. She was there when he woke, as if she had never slept, never left, and perhaps never intended to. She didn't sit, didn't lie down, didn't act like she belonged in a human routine. She simply existed in the corner, her posture calm, her gaze following him wherever he went. He got out of bed slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. Every action felt exaggerated, too loud in the quiet apartment. His mind raced with questions. How could she be real? Why hadn't she left? And most importantly, what did she want? The first day was a struggle. He attempted to act normal, to go about his usual morning routine as if nothing unusual had happened. He made tea, brushed his teeth, and even tried to glance at her reflection in the mirror. But she didn't appear in it. At first, he thought it was a trick of the angle, but when he moved, she remained visible in the room, watching him, unmoving. His reflection told him he was alone. But the truth of the room told him otherwise. When he sat down at his small kitchen table, she was closer than he expected. Not right next to him, but close enough that he felt her presence pressing in, heavy and impossible to ignore. She didn't speak immediately. She just watched him stir sugar into his tea, the spoon scraping softly against the cup. The sound, so ordinary, now seemed amplified in his heightened state of awareness. "You drink tea this way every morning," she said finally, her voice calm and even, with no emotion attached. He froze, the spoon mid-air. How could she know that? No one else had ever noticed. It was a small habit, something so insignificant it never occurred to him that anyone could see it. Yet, she did.
She knew him. I don't know how you know that,
he said, finally setting the spoon down. His hands shook slightly. What are you? She tilted her head again, that small movement that seemed to carry curiosity, though not quite human. I am someone who needs to observe. You have patterns. I need to see them. Patterns. The word made him tense. She wasn't just watching. She was studying him, learning him. And if she could learn his habits so quickly, what else could she know? The day stretched on, strange and surreal. Every time he moved, every time he spoke, every small action he took, she mirrored it with her attention. At first it was subtle. She shifted slightly when he moved, leaned forward when he spoke, but gradually it became more invasive. She would comment on things he hadn't even noticed about himself, the way he rubbed his thumb over a small scar on his hand, the slight hesitation when he picked up his phone, even the quiet sighs he didn't realize he made when he was thinking. By the afternoon, he had stopped trying to pretend. He avoided her gaze, kept his movements minimal, and attempted to concentrate on work. He sat at his laptop typing slowly, thinking that if he ignored her, she might leave. But she didn't. She simply observed her presence constant and unyielding. He tried to go outside, reasoning that fresh air might break the tension, but as soon as he opened the door, she stepped forward, just inside the frame, looking up at him, with the same calm, knowing eyes. He felt a surge of frustration, mixed with fear. "Please," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I need space. I can't live like this." She smiled slightly, almost imperceptibly, though it wasn't a warm smile. It was neutral, patient, like someone who understands something he cannot. "I will give you space," she said, "but only if you allow me to exist nearby. I cannot leave entirely." The words made him shiver. She wasn't leaving. Not now, not ever. At least, according to her. And though her tone was calm, there was a weight in her certainty that made him feel small, powerless, and entirely exposed. Days passed, or maybe it was weeks. Time seemed distorted in her presence. He couldn't tell anymore. She appeared at all hours, in the kitchen, reading over his shoulder while he worked, standing silently near the window when he tried to rest. She didn't speak unless she had to, But when she did, it was always to comment on things that made him feel seen in ways he had never experienced.
"You avoid sunlight most days," she said once, noting the curtains he habitually kept closed. "It affects your mood."
He stared at her, astonished and a little scared. How could she know that? It was true. He avoided sunlight, avoided crowds, avoided life in ways he didn't even fully understand himself.
Yet she could see it.
And it wasn't a judgment, it was an observation, as if she catalogued him like a book she had been reading for years. The effect on him was profound. He felt both observed and understood in equal measure, and it terrified him. Sometimes he found himself talking to her, sharing thoughts he had never told anyone, and yet he didn't know why. It wasn't trust. It was something more confusing, a mixture of fear or curiosity and the desperate need to make sense of her presence. His friends noticed changes. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored. He stopped visiting the small cafe where he usually drank coffee in the morning. He barely left the apartment, and when he did, he found that her presence lingered in his thoughts, her gaze following him in memory, reminding him that he wasn't alone in the way he once had been. He tried to research, to find explanations. Sleep disorders, hallucinations, intrusive thoughts, stress-induced visions. He read every article he could find. But nothing matched what he experienced. She wasn't threatening, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't a shadow of his imagination. She was real. And the more he tried to rationalize it, the more he realized he couldn't. The nights were worse. Darkness amplified her presence, made every movement sharper, every sound more vivid.
He tried leaving lights on, tried closing his eyes, tried pretending to sleep.
Nothing worked. She was there, patient, waiting, observing. She didn't speak, but he felt her thoughts pressing against his mind, her awareness brushing against his own. He started noticing patterns in her behavior. She never slept, never ate, and never left. She moved with purpose, but never in haste. She studied him, but occasionally she seemed to pause, distracted by something invisible to him. It was unsettling, but also strangely comforting in a way he couldn't explain. He wasn't alone in a world that often felt lonely, though the price of that company was the constant awareness that she would not leave.
In quiet moments, he tried to talk to her about life, about himself, about things he had never shared.
And she listened. Not just listened, but every detail he mentioned, every habit, every fear, every memory. She seemed to store and acknowledge. And though it should have been unnerving, there was a strange relief in the fact that someone, or something, cared enough to notice. Yet the relief was always tempered by fear. She wasn't human. That much was certain. And the fact that she knew him so well, observed him so closely, yet never explained herself, made him feel like a small child trying to reason with the force of nature. She had no obligation to explain, yet he wanted answers desperately. One evening, after a particularly long day of avoiding her gaze and attempting work, he finally asked, his voice low and almost pleading, "Why me? Why are you here?" Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "Because you are necessary," she said. And then she didn't speak again. The word necessary echoed in his mind, leaving him more confused than reassured. Necessary for what? DJ, what? For whom and why him? Days and nights blurred together. His sense of time began to warp. He stopped expecting normalcy. Every meal, every small task, every quiet moment carried her presence, and with it, a strange mix of fear, fascination, and dependency. But he realized he was changing. His habits shifted. His thinking altered, began to anticipate her reactions, her movements, even her silence. And though he feared it, he also couldn't deny a strange curiosity. What was she? Why did she exist? And perhaps, deep down, why did he feel that he needed her to stay?
He didn't have answers.
And he didn't expect to. All he knew was that his life had been irrevocably altered. The woman who walked into his room that night had not only refused to leave physically, but had begun to occupy every corner of his thoughts. Every plan, every decision, every fleeting moment of peace was colored by her presence. By the time he went to bed that night, he felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing: she would still be there, waiting, observing, patient, and unyielding, just as she always had been. Time began to lose its meaning. Days and nights blurred together in a haze of routine. But the routine was no longer his own. Every movement, every thought, every breath seemed to occur under her quiet observation. He could no longer separate himself from her presence. Even when he tried to close his eyes, she was there, sometimes standing in a corner, sometimes closer, sometimes just behind his vision, silent yet insistent. It wasn't fear alone that gripped him anymore. It was the strange, suffocating awareness that he had become part of her world, just as she had become part of his. At first, he thought he could resist. He tried to focus on work, on emails, on small household chores that once made him feel productive, but her attention was relentless. She noticed every pause, every hesitation, every thought he didn't even voice. If he lingered too long over a task, she would lean slightly forward, silent, as if urging him to continue, or warning him not to stop. If he moved too quickly, her gaze sharpened, her presence reminding him of the absurdity of ordinary life when she was there. He began to withdraw further from the outside world. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages from friends and colleagues sat unread. Even the small, familiar errands he had once run without thought became difficult. The supermarket, the streets, the coffee shop, everything felt distant, unnecessary, and meaningless in comparison to the pressure of existing under her eyes. And she didn't ask him to withdraw. She didn't tell him to stop seeing anyone or doing anything. She simply existed, and her existence made him shrink into himself. Sleep became another battleground. Would lie down, exhausted, only to find that sleep refused him. Even the comforting darkness of night no longer offered relief. She would sit, stand, or sometimes move just enough to be visible in the corner of his room. Sometimes she spoke in whispers that made him flinch, comments about his thoughts, about things he hadn't even realized he was thinking, about the fears he had buried deep in his mind. "You worry too much about the past," she said one night, her voice barely above the sound of the ticking clock. "And you try too hard to control the future." He had no answer. She was right. He did worry. He did try to control everything. Yet she saw it so clearly it made him feel almost exposed, as if she had peeled away every layer of his carefully constructed self. It was terrifying, yet part of him felt a strange relief that someone could see him, understand him, without judgment. But the relief was always followed by unease. He started noticing changes in himself that were subtle at first, but grew more obvious over time. He began anticipating her observations, predicting the questions she might ask, the small insights she would make about his habits. He found himself thinking in terms of her presence, structuring his day around the awareness of being watched. It was exhausting. It was maddening. And yet, he couldn't stop. His work began to suffer. Emails went unanswered. Deadlines were missed. He would sit at his desk, typing a few sentences, only to stop and stare at her silently, wondering what she thought of his words, of his efforts, of his very being. He couldn't concentrate. He couldn't escape. Even when he tried to read or watch something to distract himself, he would notice her subtly shifting position, tilting her head, or just standing silently, reminding him that he was never truly alone. Relationships outside the apartment frayed. Friends called, worried, asking why he had stopped coming out, why he no longer responded. He wanted to answer, to explain, but he couldn't. What could he say? That a strange woman, someone who may not even be human, had entered his life and refused to leave. That she studied him, observed him, and changed everything about how he interacted with the world. The words felt absurd, impossible to share without sounding insane. He tried to resist. He thought about seeking professional help. Doctors, therapists, anyone who might understand hallucinations or intrusive presences. But when he imagined describing her, he realized he couldn't. Even the strongest evidence of his own senses would not convince anyone that she was real. And maybe, he thought bitterly, maybe he was losing his mind anyway. The nights became worse. Darkness no longer offered relief. It amplified her presence.
He would wake from restless, fitful sleep, only to find her sitting in corners he had not noticed before.
Sometimes she would be near the doorway, other times behind him, and sometimes, impossibly, standing where he swore she hadn't been a moment ago.
He began to doubt the reliability of his own senses, questioning what was real and what was illusion.
And yet, paradoxically, he began to feel a strange dependence on her. Not comfort, exactly, but a certainty that someone, or something, was paying attention, understanding him, acknowledging his existence. He couldn't explain it. He didn't want to, though part of him feared the truth, that he had grown addicted to her presence. One evening, after a particularly long day of work that he barely accomplished, he collapsed onto the couch. She was there, of course, standing silently near the window, gazing out into the night. He tried to close his eyes, but her observation pressed on him like a weight. "Why are you here?" he whispered, voice trembling, almost breaking. "Why do you follow me? What do you want from me?" She turned to him, her expression calm, inscrutable. "I am here because you allowed me to exist," she said softly. "I do not demand anything else. But I will not leave until you no longer need me." The words struck him like a hammer. "No longer need you?" he repeated, confusion and frustration mixing in his voice. I don't even understand what that means." "It means," she said slowly, deliberately, "that I will stay until you are ready to see yourself fully, without fear, without hiding." "You are not ready yet." He felt an anger rise in him, sharp and confusing. "But I don't even know who you are. I can't understand why you're here, and I can't live like this." "You can live like this," she replied calmly. "Or you can change. The choice is yours. But I will remain until you face it." He lay there, words failing him, mind reeling. She wasn't threatening exactly, but her words carried a certainty he could not ignore. He realized that she had become more than a presence. She had become a force that shaped his life, whether he liked it or not. And the realization was frightening. Over the following days, he noticed more cracks appearing in his life. Work continued to slip. Meals became inconsistent. He stopped responding to messages. His body grew tired, his mind restless. And yet, she never left. Sometimes he would glance at her, and she seemed to watch him with a patience that was almost unbearable. She didn't demand anything, but her awareness of him was relentless, a mirror that reflected every insecurity, every hesitation, every unspoken thought. He began noticing small details about her that were impossible to ignore. Her movements were too precise, deliberate, yet inhumanly calm.
She never seemed to sleep, eat, or need anything.
And yet, she reacted to his emotions, shifting slightly when he was tense, leaning closer when he was confused, pausing when he spoke in frustration. She observed him not just physically, but emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually, in ways he could not comprehend. He wondered, sometimes aloud, if she was some reflection of himself, some manifestation of his mind, his fears, or his loneliness. And yet, he knew she was more than that. The way she existed, independent yet intertwined with him, could not be explained by mere psychology. She was real, and her presence was changing him, shaping him, whether he wanted it or not. One night, after an especially long and exhausting day, he confronted her directly.
I can't keep living like this, he said, voice firm though trembling. I need answers. I need to know why you're here.
I need something. She regarded him silently for a long moment. Then she spoke, softly but clearly.
Answers will come.
But not until you understand yourself. You are not yet ready.
You are too afraid, too distracted by what you think is real.
I cannot leave until you face it. And with that, she turned her gaze back to the window, silent and unyielding. He realized then that she would not simply disappear, would not vanish at his command. She was here for a reason, and that reason had little to do with him controlling her, and everything to do with him understanding himself. By the time he collapsed into restless sleep that night, he felt a mixture of exhaustion, frustration, and something he couldn't name, a sense that life had shifted in ways he could not undo. She had broken into his world, and in doing so, she had broken something within him as well. And yet, somewhere deep down, a small part of him wondered if that breaking was necessary. Perhaps, he thought, he needed her here, whether he wanted it or not. Perhaps only through her presence, through the discomfort, the observation, and the relentless patience could he begin to confront the parts of himself he had long ignored. He had reached a point where exhaustion and frustration had become constant companions. Each day felt like a long march through fog, every step guided by the invisible weight of her presence. She was always there, always observing. And though she never demanded anything, her very existence pressed on him in ways he could no longer ignore. Sleep offered no relief, work offered no relief. Even ordinary human interactions seemed hollow and distant compared to the strange intensity of being watched, studied, and understood by her. One morning, he decided he could not continue like this. He could not endure another day under the unrelenting scrutiny of someone or something he did not understand. Jay, spinning from the stages, demanded answers. He needed clarity, confrontation, and perhaps, in some corner of his mind, release. Why are you really here? He asked finally, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. He stood in the middle of his apartment, hands trembling, eyes fixed on her. I cannot live like this anymore. I need to know why. She did not respond immediately. She stood silently, calm as ever, as if weighing the words themselves, weighing him. Then she took a slow, deliberate step closer, tilting her head in that impossible way that always unnerved him. I am here because you are ready to face yourself, she said softly, but you will not understand fully until you accept what is real. The words made him pause. Accept what is real. He had spent countless nights trying to convince himself that she was an illusion, a hallucination, or something that would vanish if he simply ignored her long enough. But now he realized that ignoring her had never worked. Nothing he did had any power over her presence. She existed not to be controlled, but to reveal. Reveal what? What do you mean?
Your fears.
Your regrets. Your truths you refuse to see, she replied. Her gaze was calm, almost gentle now, though it carried a weight that pressed on his chest. Until you face them, I cannot leave. Not entirely. Not yet. Her words cut deeper than any threat could. He had spent years avoiding himself, avoiding the quiet thoughts that pricked at him in lonely moments. And now, in the stillness of his apartment, with her unwavering presence, there was no avoiding any more. She forced him to confront everything he had hidden from himself, every choice he had made, every opportunity he had ignored, every fear he had buried deep. He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair.
And if I
face it? He asked cautiously. If I face myself, will you...
Leave? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied him with that same calm, patient gaze, as if measuring his readiness. I will leave only if you no longer need me, she said at last. You must see yourself clearly, without fear, without hiding.
Only then will my purpose here be complete.
The rune fell into silence. He felt the enormity of her words pressing down on him. It was not just her presence that had changed him. It was the truth of her observation, the reflection of himself she had forced him to confront, for weeks, months even. He had been living in a strange limbo between fear and fascination. Now, finally the moment of reckoning had arrived. He began slowly, hesitantly. He spoke aloud about the parts of himself he had long ignored, the regrets that haunted him, the mistakes he had made, the chances he had refused to take. He admitted the fears that had controlled him, the self-doubt that had limited him, the loneliness he had disguised behind routines and walls. And as he spoke, he felt a strange weight lifting, even as the words themselves carried pain. She listened silently. She did not interrupt, did not judge, did not offer advice. She simply existed, absorbing his words, witnessing his truths. And in that act of silent attention, he began to understand something profound. Her presence had never been about control or threat. It had been about recognition. She had forced him to see himself, and in doing so, had given him a chance to change. Hours passed. Words spilled from him until he was exhausted, drained in a way he had never known. And then finally he paused, breathing heavily, eyes red from speaking, voice cracked from confession. He looked at her, searching her expression for signs of judgment, of impatience, of anything that might signal what came next. She stepped closer, a soft smile appearing, subtle but real. You have begun to see yourself, she said. This is the first step.
Why?
There is more to understand, but the hardest part is done. You no longer fear your own truths. He shook his head, disbelief mixed with relief. And now you'll leave? Her smile remained, calm and serene.
I will remain only as long as you need me to. I will not interfere beyond observation.
I will not force change. But if you continue to grow, to understand, then my presence will no longer be necessary.
He nodded slowly, feeling the tension in his chest ease just a little. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt a spark of clarity, a sense that life could continue without her constant invasive observation. And yet, he also knew that she might not leave immediately, and that he might still see her in moments when he least expected it. The uncertainty was part of the experience, and part of the lesson she had brought into his life. Over the next few days, he noticed a subtle shift. Her presence became less intense, less pressing. She still existed in the room, still observed, but there was a gentleness to it now, a quiet patience that allowed him to breathe more freely. He could move about his apartment without the same suffocating awareness, could perform small tasks without feeling constantly exposed. Yet he never took her presence for granted. He knew that she remained, waiting for him to fully understand himself. And though he did not fear her anymore, he could not deny that she had changed him irrevocably. Every habit, every thought, every feeling had been affected by her silent, patient observation. He began to venture outside again, slowly reconnecting with the world. He answered messages, met friends for short visits, and returned to some of the routines he had abandoned. And though he carried her memory with him, the sense of being seen, observed, and understood, he felt a quiet confidence he had not known before. And yet, even in this tentative freedom, there was a lingering awareness that she had not left entirely, and perhaps never would. He caught glimpses of her in the corner of his vision, moments when she seemed almost like a shadow, almost like a memory, reminding him that some presences in life are not meant to be explained, only acknowledged. One evening as the sun set, casting long shadows across the apartment,
he spoke aloud to her for the first time in weeks. "I understand now," he said quietly.
I don't fear myself anymore. I see my mistakes, my regrets, and my truths. And I will live with them, whatever comes next. She remained silent for a long moment, then stepped closer, tilting her head in that familiar, inscrutable way.
Then perhaps my purpose here is complete, she said softly. And for the first time, he noticed a subtle lightness in her form, a faint easing of the presence that had weighed on him for so long.
He didn't know if she would disappear entirely. He didn't expect her to. Perhaps some things, some experiences, cannot be fully concluded. Perhaps they remain in our lives in small, subtle ways, reminding us of what we have faced, what we have learned, and how we have grown. That night he lay in bed, feeling exhausted but lighter than he had in months. The room was quiet, the shadows normal, familiar yet somehow different. He could feel her presence still, soft and unobtrusive, like a whisper at the edge of his awareness. And though he did not know if she would stay or go, he felt ready to live with that uncertainty, ready to embrace life fully, and to carry the lessons she had brought with her into whatever future awaited. He realized that she had never been a threat. She had been a mirror, a teacher, a guide.
I see you. I see you. I see you.
She had forced him to confront the deepest parts of himself, and in doing so, had given him something rare: clarity, understanding, and acceptance. And in that quiet, lingering presence, he finally understood the strange truth of it all. Some encounters do not end neatly, do not provide full explanations, and do not disappear when we wish them to. Some encounters remain, quietly shaping our lives, teaching us lessons we cannot yet fully grasp, and leaving us changed in ways we may only understand much later.
As he drifted into sleep, he felt a quiet peace.
The room felt larger, safer, freer, yet still alive with her subtle presence. And though he did not know when, or if, she would fully leave, he was no longer afraid. He had faced himself, acknowledged his truths, and survived the long, exhausting process of understanding. And for now, that was enough. The alien woman who had walked into his life had not left entirely, but perhaps she never needed to. She had done her work, he had done his, and in that delicate balance he felt something new, a fragile but enduring sense of hope.